There we go. So for anyone just joining us, we want to welcome you to our CLE entitled Military Racism, Realities and Remedies. We'll be starting our program in about 1 minute. In the meantime, though, I'll mention that you can follow on our website. We'll be posting the recording for this presentation on October 1, maybe a little bit sooner if I can get it done quicker. But we'll also have recordings of our past CLEs there as well. We have several up already, and I think I have 1 or 2 more I need to get up. So we have a lot of good archived content there. And of course, our website has all kinds of good stuff on it. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started. My name is James Branham. I'm a member of the steering committee of the Military Law Task Force, the National Lawyers Guild. And I'm also a solo attorney who works in the area of military law. Also, we have with us today Kathleen Gilbert and Jonathan Hutto. And maybe ask each of you to share just a little bit about yourselves for our audience. So Kathleen, do you want to go first?
Sure. I'm a legal worker in San Diego. I do military administrative law and discharge review, and I am the executive director for the Military Law Task Force. And I make trouble for the Navy being in San Diego.
And I know the Navy appreciates that.
Yes.
And Jonathan, could you introduce yourself?
Yes. Can everyone hear me okay? Kathleen, James, y'all give me okay? Okay, great. My name is Jonathan Wesley Hutto, Sr. I am a Navy veteran. I am a political organizer, educator, and agitator in the spirit of Bayard Rustin. I do come in the spirit of being an angelic troublemaker, no matter where I have found myself. In the context of this discussion, I served 7 years, 7 months, and 1 day in the United States Navy from early January 2004 until the middle part of August of 2011. It was during that time frame on board the USS Theodore Roosevelt within the context of this discussion that we waged an anti-racist, anti-oppressive struggle within my shop, a quasi-successful one, quasi in parentheses, which then served as a spark and catalyst for the appeal for redress against the Iraq War, Iraq and Afghanistan occupations in 2006, 7, 8 timeframe. We'll end it there. Look forward to the discussion and building with all of you going forward.
Excellent, excellent. Couple of housekeeping things before we go on. If you have questions along the way, please put them in the chat. What I'll be doing as a moderator for today is trying to find a good place to get those questions answered. So if I know it's going to be coming up in with what our presenters are talking about, we'll hold it until then. But we also, depending on how things, but if I can see, anyway, we may ask them the questions along the way, but we'll also have some time towards the end for questions as well. Also want to mention, if you're an attorney needing CLE credit, be sure and fill out the form that's on the website to claim credit. The cost, by the way, for lawyers seeking credits, $50, and you can pay it with the link there. I can also send you an invoice via email if you'd like. For everyone else, it's free, but we definitely recommend appreciate any donations that we can get. So for the presentation today, I thought we would start off with handing it off to Jonathan to speak for some about the reality of military racism, particularly from his perspective, what he has seen his comrades have dealt with. From there, then we're going to transition a little bit, and I'm going to share for a few minutes about some tips for what the experience of being a lawyer is like in a cross-cultural, cross-racial context. And so I'm going to give some tips from my perspective as a mostly white person of working with people of color in different contexts, and just some tips, some cautionary notes, things to be aware of and things to be humble about is really what it really comes down to. I'll be sharing about that. Then we'll shift and we'll talk. Kathy is going to be speaking especially on the legal remedies. What are some of the tools in our toolbox? And then from there, I think from there, the conversation will broaden, and Jonathan and myself will jump in as well, discussing more on the remedies, what some of the possibilities are, also the practical realities that sometimes what's written on paper and what actually happens are two different things. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Jonathan if you'd like to give us this context about the reality of military racism.
All right, thank you, James, for the introduction. Thank you to Kathleen and the Military Law Task Force of the National Lawyers Guild for organizing this very vital and very imperative discussion within the time frame in the period in which we find ourselves here in the United States of America. Oftentimes in our lives, we've heard people say things such as, if I was living during a certain time in American history, I would have done such and so. If I had the opportunity, if I was living during the turn of the century, during the Palmer Race, or if I was living during the 1950s, during the McCarthy era, or if I was living during the Great Depression, or if I was living during the Civil Rights and Vietnam anti-war era, where the time is now, we're at a time in American history where the forces of fascism, and if people are not talking about this, we certainly can't depend on it from the corporate press, but the forces of fascism, the tentacles of fascism, the stormtroops of fascism are on the move within the United States of America. And reminiscent of the way the fascists were on the move a century ago in Germany and other countries, they are attempting to use the democratic principles of this country, of freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, the opportunity to run for electoral office as a platform in order to indoctrinate, inculcate, and to build stormtroops. I'm just going to lay it out flat. And so today, to then get directly into what James has asked me to do, and I'm going to ask your discretion, if that's the right way to frame this in terms of time. I'm usually a stickler for time. I'm going to lay this out as expeditiously as I can, but I don't want to shortchange the content of what we're dealing with. And so I'm going to hit some themes here. Before we get started, I want to start off with a quote that all of us have heard before or have come across, but I want to begin that quote with the probably the quintessential abolitionist of the last, 2 centuries ago of the 19th century. I speak of Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass, who was born into slavery on the eastern shore of Maryland, escaped slavery and became very prominent as an abolitionist. One of the most moving pieces that Douglass spoke of was what he called the philosophy of reform. The philosophy of reform, and that famous quote where he talks about where there is no struggle, there's no progress. But there's a couple of pieces from there I want to pull from. And Douglass speaking of the fact that change and progress has been born of earnest struggle. Where there is no struggle, there is no progress. But he goes further when he talks about struggle. He says that it may be a moral one, it may be a physical one, it may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle. So for the latter part of the last 50 plus years or more, we haven't dealt with physical struggle. We've dealt with it in a moral, nonviolent, direct way, influenced by the teachings of those like Mahatma Gandhi and Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Peace and blessings be upon them both. But Douglass goes further to state, and then I'm going to use this context and then push into our discussion today. He says, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. Find out just what a people will submit to, or what a person will submit to, or people, and you'll find the exact amount of injustice that will be imposed upon them. And these injustices will continue until they are resisted with words, with blows, or with both. The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those they oppress. And so with that being stated, going and getting into our conversation here today, racism and white supremacy within the military, within the United States military, which I definitely endured, survived, was victimized by it, but then also struggled against it and was empowered in that struggle with others in fighting against it. Let me say that it is a microcosm of the society. It's not some sort of anomaly, if that's the right word to use. It's not something that's, over there somewhere. And in fact, believe it or not, this is the inconvenient truth about the military, is that in terms of its systems of addressing racism and oppression, although not perfect in any way, in some ways, on paper in some ways, as I get into this, might be a little more transparent than even in the civilian society in some ways. It's really interesting. We'll talk about it real quickly. I think the first thing that I want to hit upon is the fact that a large part of the reason why I was able instinctively So it wasn't just ideological. It was culturally instinctive for me to struggle against racism and white supremacy was because of my foundational upbringing. You know, this is the reason why people like DeSantis and that whole fascist posse in the Republican Party and other elements are very strident in fighting against critical race theory and anti-racism or any notion of any sort of truth of American history being taught in American schools because they understand what it could create. You know, I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia. I was born in Atlanta, Georgia, 1977, April of 1977. I was born in a city where our slogan was "A city too busy to hate." That was the slogan of the city. This was a city that elected its first African American mayor in 1972, a gentleman by the name of Maynard Jackson. By the time I came into my childhood, our second elected mayor, African American, was Andrew Young, who you remember, you all know he's still among the living, one of the chief lieutenants of the Civil Rights era in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. You know, on any given day, I could bump into people like John Lewis, who at the time, the late John Lewis on the city council of Atlanta, Julian Bond, a state senator, Hank Aaron, who was a famous baseball player. You know, I used to see him at the barbershop I would go to. This was the social milieu that I grew up in, okay? I went to the Butler Street YMCA, which is right down the street from the Nonviolence Center, the Dr. King Center for Nonviolent Social Change on Auburn Avenue. We were raised and grounded and literally bred as Dr. King's kids. We were. Free at last, free at last, thank God Almighty, we're free at last. That was heard ad nauseum throughout institutions in my childhood. And so I say all this to say that, you know, now as a kid, we took some of this for granted as kids because the way it was taught to us, it was taught to us as if we had overcame racism, okay? It was taught to us as if we had overcome and we were pushing forward as a people and as a society. Racism really did not become real to me, seriously. I mean, real, I mean, not felt personally, but real in the sense of seeing it in society until early 1987. The late James Loewen, a sociologist who passed away maybe a year and a half ago, wrote a book that many of you have on your shelves called Lies My Teacher Told Me. It's a companion piece that many people study right along with Howard Zinn's A People's History, okay? But James Loewen wrote another book called Sundown Towns. It talks about many towns and hamlets throughout America, which at the turn of the century, and still many culturally, still to this day, were literally, legally sundown towns. This means towns where Blacks, Jews, and other undesirables were not to be in the town when the sun went down. Furthermore, you were banned from the town legally. Okay, one of those counties was right about 30 miles outside of Atlanta called Forsyth County, Georgia. It's a town called Cummings. Okay, there was a march there in early 1987, about 90 people, an integrated march to pretty much celebrate the King holiday, and the chant of "niggers go home" went live throughout Atlanta. This was 30 miles outside of Atlanta. Yeah, that was the first time I'd seen something like this. And then Oprah Winfrey did a show from there that literally pulled the mask off of my face in terms of what we were dealing with. And my parents had to really have a serious conversation with us about where Atlanta was situated within the old Confederacy, you know. And so that's when it first became real to me. And then 1992, the Rodney King beating and torture of Rodney King and the subsequent acquittals, the first acquittal of those officers, that then, you know, blew it wide open for me. So I say that to say that my foundational piece from there to Howard University and meeting and training with the late Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party Chairman Lawrence Guillot, I wrote about that in the Peace and Justice Studies Association Journal, the Peace Chronicle. It's called A Child of SNCC. That piece there, I don't want to get too deep into the foundational piece, but I got to mention that because joining the Navy at age 26, 3 months shy of my 27th birthday, and enlisting in the United States Navy, this is the history I'm coming with. I'm coming with a child born in the New South, an element of the New South, that is. Not the South wasn't totally new, right? But an element of it. Atlanta, Georgia, the birthplace of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a place that said it was a city too busy to hate. This was the theme of our city, a city where many of those civil rights heroines had now ascended, that's the right way to frame it, into electoral office. This was the social environment inmate Lou Dot came up in, which was antithetical to the environment of the United States Navy. Let's just put that out there, okay? Join the Navy. Let me lay this out. I walked onto my ship on late July of 2004, July 26th to be exact. When you get orders to a ship, you have to sign in before midnight. Tell you how excited I was to get to the ship. I must have signed in about 10:30 at night, which in military times, what, 22:30? Okay. So I get to the shop the next day. Okay, the shop meaning the photo lab. I enlisted as a photographer's mate in the United States Navy. That was my job. Okay, so in the Navy, they call your job a rate. I believe in the Army, they call it MOS. Okay, so my rate was photographer's mate. I then became mass communication specialist later. In my first day in the photo lab, I would never forget this as long as I live. I wasn't saying a whole lot. You know, I'm just assessing the environment, you know, meeting a few people. The ship was in what's called a shipyard period. So a carrier, an aircraft carrier is the biggest ship in the Navy. I was assigned to an aircraft carrier. It had just come out deployment about maybe 5-6 months back. So when you're in a shipyard, you're getting refueled and going through all this rehabilitation to go back out to sea again. So we're in Portsmouth, Virginia, in a shipyard. Shipyard is a very dangerous environment, by the way. I think my first day there, I saw a guy foot get ran over by a forklift. I mean, it's very, you got to keep your head on a swivel when you're in a shipyard, seriously speaking. So after assessing me for about 5 minutes, Seaman Michael Cole, upstate New York at the time, he looks at me, he says to me, "You must be one of those real black people, huh? You one of those real ones, huh?" Now, I was taken aback by the statement. You must be one of those real black people. I'm like, what does he mean by real? Is there such thing as fake black people? I mean, politically, of course, I mean, we if you said fake black people, I'm thinking about Clarence Thomas, but I'm thinking about what does he mean by real black people? What does that mean? Well, I came to understand what he meant within the days and weeks ahead. Michael Cole was an overt racist. Overt, meaning out front. I had never seen no one like this before. Now, I had been exposed to subtle kind of racism within the liberal context. I mean, I had worked at nonprofits before, Amnesty International, ACLU. I certainly been around white liberals, and I had seen how they are with the veil of liberal racism, and we could talk about that another time. I had never been exposed to overt racism. I'm talking about somebody who referred to Martin Luther King as Martin Luther Coon, okay? I'm talking about someone that would give Nazi salutes in the office. I'm talking about someone that spoke highly of the Klan. This out front, okay? And what was most depressing about this for me was not only the out front, just brazen nature of this guy, Michael Cole, and his supporting cohort of folks who would not be throwing Nazi signs, but would be laughing and joking. But the response of the African Americans in the shop. See, this is where internalized oppression comes in. So you can write this down, that the white supremacy, the way this plays out, the white supremacy and the racism, is you have the overt racism of some, who then is supported and laughed and jeered with by others. But then you got the internalized oppression that's going on amongst African Americans, okay, where they're either, chuckling or joking as well, or they're not saying anything about this, okay. I made it clear. I find your behavior reprehensible. I find it indefensible, okay. Then the behavior, this is where the institutional aspect of this comes in. The behavior is then backed up by the chain of command, see. When I mean backed up, meaning it is not called out. And so this is enshrined within. So I talk about this guy Cole being my first exposure to this overt, just out front racism, okay? Then you get this enshrined institutional aspect within the E6, the first class petty officer. Now, within the United States Navy, the E6, first class petty officer, by the time you make E6 in the United States Navy, you pretty much have become a careerist. Okay, so there's a dividing line between what they call the lifers and the non-lifers. I certainly was not a lifer. Okay, obviously I wasn't, right? But the lifer, once you become an E6, then you in enlisted ranks. That means that you have decided to make this a career. You're gonna at least go about 20 years, towards a retirement or higher, towards the E7, etc. And so this was enshrined within, until this very day, the most totalitarian, authoritative, uh, draconian. I mean, I can go on and on. Certainly fascist minded individual I ever came across in my life, named James Fell, who was the first class pay officer in that shop. He ran it with an iron fist. When he first looked at my photographs, he told me to my face, "This is the worst photography I've ever seen in my life." You know, he ran the shop with an iron fist. He barked orders. If he didn't want you to get off work at a certain time, you didn't. Okay, he would keep sailors up cleaning. I remember one time, hey, everybody, it seemed like the whole ship had gone to sleep. We still up cleaning. Okay, this is the kind of environment that this guy ran. It was meant to be ran in such a way in order to break your spirit, to break your personality, to break your personhood. Okay, I resisted. Okay, and in one particular day, I don't want to go through the whole litany, but I want to hit on these things. So we talk about the things of institutional racism, both the overt of certain persons and the internalized piece. We talk about the actual institute, and then the institution within the totalitarian E6. Okay, one in December of 2004, we're in what's called a stand down period. Stand down means that it's the holiday period. The ship is ran through what's called duty section. Okay, if you're off going duty section means you stay 24 hours on the ship to man the ship. Man, I know that's a masculine term. That's what they use to man the ship. And if you're the off-going duty section, you get to leave and go home early. This gentleman, this fascist-minded E6, first-class pay officer, what they call a lead petty officer, LPO, attempts to keep me beyond my time. Everybody else can leave. You stay. Okay, you stay. All right. Again, break your personality, break your sense of personhood, your any sort of notions you show of thinking for yourself, having a questioning disposition, which I outwardly had. I had a question. Now I wasn't what you call a disobedient saint. I just had a questioning disposition, and some of it was even nonverbal. What I did, it wasn't always verbal, But if you looked a certain way, so. I brought this up. This was the first time I went to equal opportunity. This is the first time I went to equal opportunity. It was in December of 2004, late 2004. I was early in my career, to use that term rather loosely, my career. And when I went to equal opportunity, okay, and I was told to, first I went to my chain of command before going to equal opportunity. Let me back up. In the Navy, the ethos is you handle things at the lowest level possible. Okay, they always drill that into you. Handle things at the lowest level possible. Now, they say you handle things at the lowest level possible in order to maintain command cohesion, organizational cohesion. And the term they use is esprit de corps, I believe the term they use. But in reality, let me show you how this works in reality. I'm going to show you this, hopefully not long, but over time, I'll show you this. That what that really does, this handling things at the lowest level possible, it ensures that the oppression never gets exposed. See, it really protects your immediate chain of command, this lower level possible thing. So when I went to my immediate chain of command about this fascist LPO, this E6, this James Fell, keeping me after work while letting everybody else go home, and then my chain of command asked me to write the events down. They did came back and told me I misinterpreted everything. You misinterpreted that. You didn't really get that right. You misinterpreted. Okay. That's when I said I'm going to EO. Okay. Now, why do I know about EO? Because when you get to the ship, nobody tells you about equal opportunity. But the reason why I knew about equal opportunity was because in boot camp they talked about it. See, in boot camp is when they tell you, it's almost like when you watch movies like Training Day, and you see the officer who shows up with everything in his head of how he thinks being a police officer or a narc is, and then you get this guy that tells you what it really is. Okay.
Oh yeah.
When you get out to the Navy, that's when they tell you what it really is. So you don't hear about this equal opportunity stuff when you get out to your ship. But in boot camp, they mentioned it a couple of times. In other words, they would say within your chain of command is an equal opportunity advisor, command manage equal opportunity called a CMEO, command manage equal opportunity, etc. Okay. So I went there. This was a senior chief for E8. And I told him about the incident. The E8 then tells me to write it up to him, and he'll bring all the parties together to then deal with the issue. After that, I never heard back from Equal Opportunity. That's when the Master Chief got involved. This is the highest enlisted rank in the Navy. Okay, a guy named Craig Cronewood, I never forget. He got involved. Okay, and what he told me, I never forget this meeting. It was very intense because every time I attempted to address him, I was told, "You address me as Master Chief. It's Master Chief Cronewood." See, in other words, he let me know that really the problem was not this fascist-minded E6. The problem is you. Okay, you're early to the Navy. You haven't learned the Navy culture and Navy ethos. Okay, you need to internalize this first before you come around here to equal opportunity, talk about equal opportunity. Okay, but I continued to press the issue. Now, what I didn't understand, you can write this down, is that I was going against I didn't understand this. I was going against the naval culture of doing things. And I was making myself a marked person. So this gets to the next to one of the next things here, and that is the retaliatory aspect of the chain of command. Once you go to the chain of command, see, I didn't understand. I'm very naive to this. Okay, I believe I'm just being my unconscious self. Not understanding that when you go to equal opportunity for any active duty that's on here listening or that will listen to this afterwards, once you go to equal opportunity, the games begin. Okay, they are plotting a way to break you. In parentheses, we got to stop this. He thinking it's going to be fair and equitable in the chain of command. No, the chain of command governs arbitrarily. Okay, so once I was done with going to equal opportunity that first time, they came forward to me. Senior Chief Mills, who was the E8 in my command, told me, "Okay, we're going to treat you fairly, Jonathan. We were sorry about this." That's what they said to me verbally. We apologize for leaving you behind that day. It shouldn't have happened. It's not going to happen again, etc. But that's not what they really meant. What they really meant was, the first opportunity we get, we're going to bust your ass. That's what we're about to do. And it happened early 2005. Now, the way it works in your chain of command in the Navy, we got duty, is you have to report to duty. You have to, unless there's some extenuating circumstance. Extenuating circumstance doesn't mean I just don't feel like coming. Extenuating circumstance means I'm sick as a dog to the point I can't get up out of bed. Extenuating circumstance means there's a massive emergency with my child. It got to be an extenuating circumstance, and your chain of command will work with you. I saw that work in my shop. I saw people who went out. I saw people who were worked with who really were abusing the system. I won't give all the anecdotes, but I saw this happen. But in my situation, I got snowed in, having gone to my son's birthday party. Okay, New York City got snowed in, and actually could not get back to no, it wasn't New York City. Excuse me, Washington D.C. They were staying in New York City, but the party was in Washington D.C. Got snowed in, could not get back, and just did what I was told to do. Let your chain of command know, etc. When I got back to the ship, I was brought to a hostile meeting. I never forget. With the E8, Senior Chief Mills, the E7, Chief Ernest Frazier. Write this down. That this equity this equity debate that we're hearing a lot within the nonprofit industrial complex. You hear this push for equity. And the reason why I kind of shake my head at it a little bit, not because I'm opposed to equity, because I'm not. I mean, who would oppose organization being equitable? However, my chain of command on the surface looked very equitable. okay, within the enlisted ranks. Within the enlisted ranks of the Navy, you get a good amount of African Americans. And my chief petty officer in the E7 was an African American. One of the E5, the Alpo, the assistant lead petty officer, a guy named Reginald Buggs, who ended up retiring as a master chief in the Navy. I'm gonna talk about him in a minute. Um, he African American male. You know, African Americans are very much interwoven within my chain of command. Latinos as well. Women. The command master chief, which is the third highest on the ship, one of the first women command master chiefs on my ship, Beth Lambert, a woman. Okay, so no, from the enlisted side of the Navy, it would look very equitable. But this doesn't mean that the equity equates to anti-oppression and anti-racism. Okay, right? You got to write that. That's clear, and that's what was happening here. I'm in a hostile meeting. My E7 in the room, Ernest Frazier, retired as a senior chief, and Ernest Frazier, I liked him on a personal level, actually, on a personal level, but politically opposed. Politically, we're on different sides here. I asked for a witness in that meeting. I was denied the witness. I was asked for one of my colleagues, Chris Mason out of Richmond, Virginia, to be a witness to this. I wanted a witness because I didn't see them. I didn't see them as my advocates. They denied the witness. Now, where am I getting this witness language from? I was told this in equal opportunity. I can have a witness in a meeting. I then said that the chain of command does not exist for me. It exists as an extension of command authority. That's when I was dismissed from the meeting. I was dismissed from the meeting and written up on report. Okay. This legal report then took me to the draconian, what they call disciplinary review board. Should be called draconian review board. I was screamed at repeatedly. And this is a multiracial, this equity argument. This disciplinary review board, they call it disciplinary. This was the real Navy now. Okay, all that other stuff, you put that aside. This was the real Navy, the disciplinary review board, where I'm made to do all these parade ground, half turns, salutes, screamed at repeatedly. I got one white male master chief telling me, quote, we need to kick you out of my damn Navy or I kick your ass. Okay. There's a black female black female chief that asked me, had I ever heard of Hallmark, the card store. That's what you need to do next time for your son. Send him a card. Forget the birthday. Okay, mission first. So see, this is dehumanization 101. Okay, and then I was told by the command master chief, the female, you didn't have a lot of command master chiefs that were women. Okay, the command master chief, white woman, Beth Lambert, tells me you have not shown, the proper amount of contrition here today. We're sending you to XOI, Executive Officers Inquiry. Okay, that's when I had enough of the Navy. Y'all can have this. Okay, in my mind, they had broken me, but not how they think they broke me. They broke me to the point where I'm getting out of here. Okay, this was early 2004, and when I was made to stand at attention, in the photo lab for about 30 minutes at attention while I was awaiting a sea bag inspection. This is another. So the intimidation and the oppression and the arbitrary use of authority. You can write this down. It's the law in the military. This is legal. Everything that's happening to me is legal. This is legal. What's happening to me? Okay. I make a long story short. When they wasn't looking, I'm standing at attention. I did go AWOL. I mean, I went AWOL. I went and grabbed as much stuff as I could grab, and I hauled off that ship. Okay, let me stop right here for a minute and do a time check. Kathleen, how much time I got left before I need to pass this baton?
I think James is watching time.
Probably about 5 minutes.
Okay, all right, about 5 minutes. Okay, so that's when I hauled off the ship. Okay, and when I hauled off the ship and I got to Washington D.C. and I made a phone call to Dr. Rodney Green, who was an economics professor at Howard University. He's retired now. But I called Rod because Rod is a veteran of the GI movement, which I came into knowledge of while he and I were struggling together against police brutality in neighboring Prince George's County, Maryland, where I live here today. This is prior to me joining the Navy. That's another thing is this, what I'm bringing with me into the Navy, okay? It was Rod's assertion, Rod being a working class fighter for years and decades, Rod being a longtime member of the Progressive Labor Party, which organization, which during the time of the Vietnam era actually trained their members to purposely go into the military to organize. They did that kind of work. It was Rod's in order to destabilize from within the war effort in Vietnam. It was Rod's assertion that what I had done was foolhardy, that it was very individualistic in character, that it was not in any way challenging the chain of command. He also felt that, the number of my shipmates probably felt the same way I felt, and that they expressed it different. And he thought that if I went back to the ship and actually paced myself and actually embraced the suck, as everyone else, that I could potentially build, a movement from within. Okay, went back to the ship, rogered up, took the punishment, ended up having to, serve a month of punishment. They called it EMI, extra military instruction. Had to end up serving punishment under this despotic fascist fail for a month. Okay. But then a year later, off the coast of Iraq, when I'm deployed, I actually got a hangman's noose in front of my face. Okay. So what I want to do in lieu of time, I want to pass it to James. We're going to start with the news piece. We got to come back to that, though, right? So I want to show the second part. So I gave y'all my first venture into equal opportunity. And if James and Kathleen will allow me, I want to finish up on the second venture and what that second piece showed, and specifically the role of these leading African Americans and the leading the Jewish Americans, the EA, in relationship to that noose incident. Again, this question of equity is not one. If it's not anti-oppression, then all it is, it's a tool of oppression. It's just taking, sadly, people from the most marginalized sector of society and then using it as a tool against their own liberation. To be honest with you, so I'm gonna end right. I'm gonna stop right there. But if I could be blessed to come back to that piece to wrap this up towards the end, I'll try my best. I beg for y'all discretion because I don't want to shortchange this, but I do want to be mindful of the time we have. So let me stop right here. If there's any just really really burning questions, James, if you want me to take one or two, but otherwise I pass it to you.
Okay. Well, I'll mention a couple of things. I think in our time today, we have so much. This is such a good topic, and we're getting a lot of good stuff. So with y'all's permission, and I know for those of you taking it for credit, it's just the first hour is for credit. I think we may run this one a little bit long, maybe go another 15, 20 minutes beyond the hour. So I don't want to cut you short, Jonathan. There's so much that I think is important to share. So I just want to throw that out there. I'm going to speak for just a few minutes about a few practical issues, and I think this might be a helpful thing. And then we'll move to Kathy to present on the remedies side, and then we'll come back to Jonathan at the end to close us up. So the things I want to talk about today is something specific for lawyers and GI rights counselors, and that is the experience of what I call cross-racial or cross-cultural law practice. In other words, what do you do when you're representing someone who is experiencing severe oppression, but it is not expression that we ourselves have experienced firsthand on the helping side? My experience, I'm a mostly white person. I have some non-white ancestry, but I'm mostly white. I'm perceived by the world as white. Therefore, I'm not going to have the same experiences that many of my clients will have. And so because of that, I have to approach what I do differently. So the first principle I would hold forth in this is that we must stay humble. We must understand that our clients are the subject matter experts of their lives and their experiences of military racism. We need, above all else, to be good listeners and to take seriously the issues our clients are concerned about. It is not a good thing when someone calls us and says, I'm having a problem. And if the lawyer says, that's not such a big deal, No, we need to ask more questions because it is a big deal. Secondly, we need to be aware of trauma throughout our representation. Service members of color often experience PTSD from multiple kinds of trauma, not only from bad treatment in military training, not only from combat, but also from the experiences of racism, other forms of oppression, and not only from the military, but things prior to the military. Being aware of this, of trauma throughout this, and knowing that people who have been subjected to trauma in the past are more susceptible to PTSD symptoms in the future, that needs to inform everything that we do. 3, it's very important, and this is a hard one. I will be upfront. This is one of the hardest ones for me, and that is not overreacting to anger from our clients. I say that because many of our clients have been told repeatedly by the system that you don't have power. You can't speak up. They feel very disempowered, and they can't often directly confront those who are mistreating them. So sometimes what happens, that anger gets sliced and directed back to the people doing the helping. It's hard to take it, but sometimes we need to. We have to say, I get it. You've had, and sometimes we also have to be humble to say maybe our clients have a good reason to be angry at us, but to know that anger comes up and that's okay. We can live with it. 4, we need to be aware throughout our practice of the imbalance of power. Some of our clients have been mistreated so long that they will not speak up when something doesn't feel right, even just a decision to be made in the case. And so because of that, they will sometimes give undue deference to lawyers and GI rights counselors. In other words, they don't express their own doubts like they should. Because of this, we need to be aware of this and go out of our way to ensure that their questions are answered, even the ones they are not stating out loud yet. And we have to do all we can to keep our clients in the driver's seat of their case. In other words, it can, especially for much younger people, they can often have this attitude of, oh, I got a lawyer to fix this. We have to keep reminding them that I know that society, the military, everyone else has disempowered you, but you're in charge fundamentally. It's our job to empower them. Finally, we need to do all we can to support our clients in building networks of support. Many of our clients will have long fights ahead. We can do a lot as lawyers and also for GI rights counselors who are here today. We can do a lot to help our clients, to support them in the process, but many of them will need more support than we ourselves can provide. This includes support from family, religious community, activist community, mental health providers, etc. Anything we can do to encourage our clients in building their own support network is a very good thing. And I personally think this is a good conversation early on in the course of representation. When we see that the client's going to be dealing with a lot of shit coming ahead, we need to be empowering them to say, who do you got in your corner? How can I help you to bring more people in your corner? You need support. So that's what I'm going to say. I'm going to hand it off to Kathy now.
Okay, I'm going to talk mostly about military equal opportunity complaints, although I will mention along the way some other forms of complaints. MEO is the procedure and system that the military thinks should be used for discrimination based on protected classes, race, color, gender, including pregnancy, religion. They have more recently added sexual orientation to that. And in some other expansions that are, to me, kind of exciting, sexual harassment got added to the MEO system, that was the complaint procedure to use for sexual harassment. And most recently, that it's the procedure to be used for bullying and harassment of a more general kind. These last couple are particularly nice because you don't have to show the discriminatory intent that you would need to successfully make a challenge against racism or sexism. Harassment is harassment, whatever the intent of the harasser. The regulation that covers this, that I think James has put up in the chat, is Department of Defense Instruction 1350.02. It went through a major revision in September of 2020, and there has been one change to it since then in in December of 2022. That change doesn't affect what we're working on here. It mostly has to do with command climate surveys and data collection. So the heart of the regulation or the instruction is what happened in 2022, which I will get into at boring length in a few minutes. Most service members have a really cynical attitude, to no great surprise, about the MEO system. They're first likely to tell us that it's just not effective, and second likely to tell us that it's a very reasonable conclusion that they'll face retaliation if they make a complaint or even talk about making a complaint. Well, those things are really true. And they are the reason that a lot of people don't use the MEO system, don't make any complaints about racism or other oppression. But my point here is that the MEO system can be made more effective and more successful with counsel, with a really serious effort at documentation, with pressure from other service members and from civilian sources, including some of the things that Jonathan has and is going to suggest. Retaliation, while it's a very serious problem, can be diminished or sometimes completely blocked with a firm legal and political fight. Having said that, as James told us, we really need to be respectful of the client's experiences and their better knowledge of what oppression looks like at their command or in their branch of the service as a whole. It's not our job to talk someone into doing an MEO complaint, but rather, if they decide that's something that they want to do, to make sure that they have as much protection as possible and to make sure that they know enough about the system and the regs to use it as effectively as they can. Just briefly to mention alternatives or additions. Some people prefer to take a low-key approach. Jonathan talked about keeping it as low in the chain of command as possible, which is certainly one approach that works sometimes in good commands. It can also be used not at the lowest level, but at the commanding officer level by informal discussion with the CO through an open door policy or what the Navy calls request mast. Yes, you're seen as a troublemaker if you do that, but it's not as great a troublemaking as filing a complaint. And if the command is halfway decent, this can resolve some problems. There are other complaint procedures that can be used, my favorite being Article 138 of the UCMJ, which is the redress of grievance article, and can be used most any time a person has been wronged within their command and the commanding officer either committed the wrong or won't fix it. Similarly, some people choose to go to the Inspector General to make complaints. I'm not a big fan of IG complaints as a method, but they do have their place. The problem with both 138s and IG complaints is that the system will try to push the case back into the military equal opportunity system rather than allowing an independent investigation or an independent complaint under 138 or the IG. I would argue that you can do both. The military does not always accept my argument, but I think there's an argument to be made there. Some people also use congressional intervention, which can be really helpful if the congressperson takes a serious interest in the case and doesn't just make a pro forma request for information. While service members can't jump the chain of command, nothing prevents a lawyer or advocate from going over the command's head, either to the next level of command, excuse me, or to military headquarters. Speaking on behalf of their client there may get enough annoyance at the lower level of command to force them into some action. Under the 2020 MEO regulation instruction, people can now make anonymous MEO complaints, which means that if you can provide enough information without providing your name, the complaint should be investigated and some remedy should be made if the complaint is substantiated. Sometimes not giving your name means that there's no way to look at the information, to look at the case. But in other cases, particularly with people who are multiple oppressors, an anonymous complaint from one or more people can be helpful. I like to argue that anonymous witness statements should therefore be allowed, although I haven't had a chance to test that yet. The final thing I want to say about these alternatives and about MEO is that the threat of doing them is often as effective as actually doing them. One of my favorite approaches is to have my client say, "Sir, I don't want to do this. I don't want to make trouble. But, you know, I went to the military law task force and they're talking about 138s and going to the press. And, gosh, if I can't resolve this somehow in a polite, gentlemanly way, they're going to run rampant with this. So blame it on the outsiders. Show you're a good guy, but mention these dreadful remedies." So looking at the MEO complaint process, there are two methods. One is an informal method, which is keeping it at a lower level, not reducing a whole lot of it to writing, making a sort of polite, mediation-like approach to resolving a problem. It used to be that the MEO system really pushed that. But the new regulation, the new instruction, does give more attention to the other alternative, which is to make a formal, written, sworn complaint that has to be examined by the command, investigated if it's found to be substantiated at all, and if successful, can result in some really practical remedies that's reviewed by higher levels of command. I'm not sure, unfortunately, that personnel have really caught up with this shift of emphasis. So in the field, you may find a real desire from MEO professionals and commands to get you to just go talk to the chief. Don't worry about any of this other stuff. Just go talk to the chief. She'll take care of it for you. Most counselors and attorneys prefer formal complaints, partly because you get a great written record if you need to do anything further, partly because there are actually some rules, and partly because you are in a better position to present evidence and arguments than you would be with an informal complaint. There's a time limit here. A complaint should be submitted to the MEO officer or to some other command representative, either within 60 days of the misconduct or 60 days of the most recent piece of the misconduct. There are grounds for giving you additional time if there's some really strong reason, like you were in the hospital, the racist oppressor punched you in the face and therefore you were in the hospital. But in most cases, you need to look at it within 60 days. Some of the other methods of complaint have longer time periods. So if you're past the 60 days, you may want to look at 138s where there's a 90-day period, or IG complaints where I believe there's actually a year, or congressional inquiries where there's no time limit at all. So I've been talking about this MEO officer. He or she is not an officer. DOD now calls them professionals rather than officers, but in my old Navy fighting heart, I can't change the language. So the not officers, at the low level, it's usually collateral duty. That is, it's not their main area of work. It's something that they are required to do on the side. They are also not set up to be advocates for the complainants. Instead, their real commitment is to the command officially, to help the command deal with problems of discrimination. They do have to advise complainants on their rights, on the procedures, on appeal rights, on what to do officially if there's retaliation, but they don't have to advocate for the person in any of those settings, and many of them don't. It does depend to some extent on the heart of the MEO officer, and some of them do really good advocacy, but you can't go into a situation expecting that to happen. One other thing that they need to do, aside from telling you all your rights, is to tell a complainant, by the way, there are penalties for making a false official statement. When you submit your services form to make a complaint, and it involves a sworn statement, you'd better be sure that you are telling the truth, because there are criminal charges available if you haven't. I think all of us have run into cases in other settings where, or this setting, where people have made complaints or reported sexual assault only to be written up for making a false statement.
Kathy, would it be helpful here for me to put the form on the screen like we talked about?
Yes, please. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I thought it was.
Yeah, I will pull it up right now.
This is the Army form. In the memo on assisting service members in military equal opportunity complaints that we're going to put up on the website soon, by October 1st, I think, this form and all the other service forms are mentioned by name. They're easily findable online. One of the tricks about this form is that the equal opportunity officers think they're supposed to fill it out, or you're supposed to come into their office, sit down with them for the first time, and fill it out on the spot. This does not make for a good complaint. This is the complaint form, which means that the best way to deal with it is to take it back to your attorney or counselor, spend a good amount of time keeping an eye on that 60 days, but spending a good amount of time writing out the complaint, gathering evidence to support it, perhaps attaching a legal brief just to let them know that counsel is there, and then taking it into the military equal opportunity officer, who likely as not will say, nope, sorry, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. I can't accept this. Go back and redo it. There is nothing in the regulations that allows for that. Asking to see the section of the reg that allows for that sometimes solves the problem. Other times, counsel or counselor or a JAG may need to say that the complaint is to be submitted as written. The only exception to that would be, I think, if it contained classified information or such abusive language that it rose to the level of a threat against the commander or commander-in-chief, something that actually violates military law. But otherwise, it's up to the client to determine how to frame the form. MEO officers don't get this.
Well, notice how small of an area they give you for nature of complaint and requested remedy. Almost,
Right.
I can, it's hard for me even to imagine where that would be a scenario that you could fully explain a situation. I mean, it does say very clearly, attach additional sheets as needed. But again, if your client goes into the EO office and fills it out there on the spot, I'm sure they're not going to point out to them, you can and should add more to this.
Absolutely must add more to it, both in the way of documentation and in the way of explanation of what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, with the documentation, which I'm not going to go into very much for time reasons, it's useful to actually list all the documentation on the form so that it doesn't get lost, so that there's a record that it was part of the submission. It's also useful somewhere on the form or on the client statement to notice that copies are being sent to a lawyer, the Military Law Task Force, the ACLU, the NAACP, the National Conference of Black Lawyers, or a local community group that's active in Norfolk. This does help forms not to get lost, and it does tell the command that this person might not be fighting this all by herself or himself. So one puts together this form and puts together evidence. There are no rules of evidence in these proceedings, these admin proceedings, which means that you can submit very creative evidence. You can use your client's own journal as a form of evidence, or letters written home, or emails between third parties and fourth parties worrying about your client because of this abusive behavior going on in his or her shop. Being creative and helping the client to think creatively about what shows the racist behavior, what shows the discrimination, or just shows harassment if you can't get an intent. That creativity can be very effective. Commands will say none of this counts, but the rules of evidence don't apply. It does count. And I need to catch up with where I am in my notes. The MEO officer takes the form, has you sign it under oath, takes all of the documentation and statements and briefs you've put with it and grumblingly accepts them as well, and then takes it to the commanding officer, whose job is to make a quick determination that there is some credibility here, they can't ignore it, and then to appoint an investigating officer to do an investigation into the complaint itself. I'm sorry, I can't read my notes. The exception to this is the Air Force, by the way, where the MEO officer himself or herself does the investigation. This may not be like what you and I think of as a good investigation. Some investigators ignore the client. Some of them ignore witnesses proposed by the client. Some of them ignore witnesses who obviously would have evidence or information about the racism. Some of them will look for witnesses or non-witnesses to try to trash the complainant, to show, for example, that he has disciplinary problems or a grudge against the person complained of, or mental health problems and just isn't rational and we can't really trust anything he says. Some investigating officers will look for that sort of behavior and sort of help the command to circle the wagon, which means that it's valuable to keep a close eye on the investigation, preferably through third parties so that the complainant doesn't appear to be stalking the witnesses. But to make sure that witnesses are being treated properly, that the questions are proper. One of the things about the investigation is that the MEO officer in some services is supposed to offer questions that the investigating officer should use. And in all services, the investigating officer is supposed to get a briefing from the command legal officer or staff judge advocate about the legalities of an investigation. These are normal, informal military investigations. For the Navy, they're talked about in the Manual of the Judge Advocate General's Office, the JAGMAN in Chapter 3. In the Army, they're in Army Regulation 27-10, which don't give a whole lot of help, but tell at least what form the investigation should take and how evidence should look when it's put together by the investigating officer. The standard, by the way, is a preponderance of evidence standard, which is good for us if they paid attention to it. So the investigating officer does all of this very valuable work and then makes findings of fact and recommendations to the commanding officer, whose job it is to determine if the complaint is substantiated, that is, if it's valid, and if so, to determine what remedy should be given. Is the person entitled to an apology? Should they be given back the job they were kicked out of? Should some admin or disciplinary action be taken against the offender? And the commanding officer is the one who makes those determinations. Fortunately, there are appeal rights. The DOD says that either party can appeal within 30 days of being notified of the command decision. However, I've lost it. The Army and the Navy give 7 days to appeal. Now, I don't know if you've ever worked on an appeal of a complicated case with lots of evidence in it. You probably have, and you probably know that 7 days is not a good idea. In those cases, I think it's worth arguing that the DOD instruction is controlling. It says 30 days, therefore there should be 30 days. But to be on the safe side, I would submit something within 7 days, noting that it would be amended in keeping with the DOD timeframe. I think I'm running out of time, so I'm not going to talk much about types of evidence. When we get the memo up on the website, it has a long section on types of evidence, how to craft evidence, truthfully, of course, and how to deal with other creative ways of showing the case. But I do want to talk just a little bit, if I have time, about retaliation.
Yeah, we about 5 minutes. I'll just mention that I think what we've seen here is there's so much good. We will probably do a follow-up to this training down the road. I think there's a lot here, but I think about 5 more minutes, and we need to switch to Jonathan to wrap it.
Okay. So retaliation. This is a real thing in the military. I've had JAGs and friends tell me that making a complaint is a career-ending experience for those who want careers. I've had other clients tell me about psychological and actually physical retaliation that came even for being suspected of having made a complaint. The DOD instruction doesn't have a lot about retaliation except to say that it won't be tolerated, but it doesn't say what to do about it. There, one usually looks to the IG and to the Military Whistleblower Protection Act, which is at 10 U.S. Code Section 1034. Originally, this was designed for cases where adverse personnel action was taken or good personnel action was withheld because someone made a protected communication to an inspector general or a member of Congress. And then they began adding to it. It's now the case that a communication is covered by the Military Whistleblower Protection Act if it's made to anyone in the chain of command, anyone who is supposed to be looking into or reporting or taking care of the kind of behavior that's mentioned, testifying at a court-martial is now a protected communication, as is assisting in an investigation of misconduct or discrimination. It's bigger. It applies much more broadly than those of us who learned decades ago thought it did. And that means it also applies more broadly than many military personnel know. The other thing that has broadened is the kind of abusive behavior that's covered. When it was originally set up, the Military Whistleblower Protection Act and the regs that enforce it thought about this adverse personnel action or denial of positive personnel action. It's been broadened now to include the kind of physical, psychological, and verbal abusive behavior that often is the main form of retaliation people see. There's still a requirement in some of these situations that retaliatory intent be shown. So he bumped into the hallway and knocked me down. How do I know he did that because I made a complaint about his racist behavior? If I can't show it, if I can't get any third parties to show it, if he never wrote it down anywhere or mumbled about it in front of someone who's neutral, then I can go back to an MEO complaint for harassment, where the intent is much lesser. For the most part, as I said, this kind of retaliation is seen as something that the IG should handle. And the regs that you may want to look at for this are the Department of Defense Directive 7050.06, which is called Military Whistleblower Protection, and DoD Instruction 7050.09, which sets out the standards for investigations and for determinations. The other piece of it that doesn't get as much attention is that the command and the MEO officer also have some obligation to protect a person against retaliation. And especially since the IG process is a very slow one, I think it's useful to go to the commanding officer with counsel present or with counsel having written a letter instead, saying, my client is in danger. We need to do something about this. We need either a protective order or a temporary transfer or some measures taken against the harassers. Commands aren't going to be happy to do that, but there is an obligation there. And if they've been given information about the danger, particularly when there's a possibility of physical danger, and they don't do anything about it, their situation gets pretty vulnerable. So it is something that can be leveraged against the command. Finally, and then I will stop, there are some UCMJ provisions that are important here. Recently, Congress added Article 132 to the UCMJ, taking away whatever was in it before. It's now an article that prohibits retaliation. And it uses the old definition of adverse personnel actions or not allowing positive personnel actions. And it requires specific intent to retaliate. So it's limited, but it's exciting at the same time when upper levels of command do take career impacting action against a complainant. If there's not enough to prove up that article, sometimes cases can be brought under Article 93, which is cruelty and maltreatment of a subordinate, right? So the retaliator has to be higher in rank. If it gets physical, Article 120 criminalizes assault. Article 92 would apply if the retaliator violates a particular order or regulation. And if nothing else fits, there's always Article 134, the general article for, I'm going to get the language wrong, all conduct against good order and discipline. One other thing to say about retaliation that James has talked about, and I think Jonathan as well, is that you've got to make sure your client is safe. You've got to make sure that there are resources both on base and off, or on ship and off, to take care of the client. If the client feels sufficiently threatened and the command is refusing to take action, of course we cannot encourage a client to go AWOL or UA, but neither should we hold on to their ankles and keep them from doing it, their safety being really the top priority. In most cases, other methods of providing support, backup, a buddy, presence of legal counsel, presence of a congressperson, community involvement are sufficient to take care of the more dangerous aspects of retaliation. And on that, I'm going to stop. Sorry to have gone over.
No, you're fine. Thank you, Kathy. And again, we will be probably doing a follow-up training on this. There's so much good stuff here. So Jonathan, I want to hand it off to you now.
Okay, good. Let me so a couple of themes I want to hit. Can y'all hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great, wonderful. So a couple of things I want to hit here as I want to have some serious time for questions. So one is one of the pieces that Kathy hit upon was the need for counsel, or the victim, the one who's been victimized, having access to counsel. So one of the things I want to state is that never, in the 2 times that I went to Equal Opportunity during my 4+ years on board the USS Theodore Roosevelt, was I offered or told, or it was told to me that I could have access to counsel. In fact, when I came back from being AWOL, early 2005, what I remember about coming on board the ship was A, I had to do a urinalysis, and B, I was given some paperwork in order to sign to waive my right to counsel. Okay, so I don't remember being all. In fact, I was offered a chance to waive my right to counsel. That's what I remember from early 2005. That's number one. I will talk about that process briefly. Number two, Kathy hit upon the need for support from civilian peace workers, I frame it as, or civilian support, whether that's from organizations like the Military Law Task Force or the Center for Conscience in War, or Veterans for Peace, other organizations, or individuals who are veterans of this work and understand it and can provide support. That is critical, very critical in terms of my own being able to push as I did. I probably would have never. I think it's fair to say I probably would never went back to the ship had I not been pressed to do so. You know, I intended to go. I didn't intend to go back to the ship in 2005, early 2005. Now I didn't know what I was going to do, but I didn't intend on going back to the ship. So civilian support is imperative and beyond critical in terms of sustaining the peace worker within. That's what I'm going to say. Because the reality is that once they decide to go equal opportunity, they have to be, you can write this down, they have to go all the way. Okay. And they have to be willing. And this is what we have to explain to, we have to be upfront about this. This is what's not said in the regs. Okay. What's not said in the regs, although Kathleen hit upon it, is the career ending aspect of this for those who have decided to make the military a career. But the reality is that once you decide to go equal opportunity, you will face retaliation, guaranteed. I'll talk about what that looked like I gave you some of that the first time with equal opportunity. And you will face physical and psychological pain. You will be ostracized. You will feel marginalized. And depending on how strong internally you are, this is no judgment of a person. If you're not strong enough internally to deal with this, you're going to suffer some post-traumatic stress. You may be depressed. You may have some serious thoughts that go against, your own personhood. At bare minimum, you're going to need some counseling. And it's important that you document this, and that when you get the counseling, the post-traumatic stress, that you document within your service record. Why? So you can file for disability upon leaving the military. File because the military owes you some form of certainly restoration, but repayment for the stress, the harm, and the damage that was done to you within a racist and white supremacist environment. Okay, so I talked about my first time going to equal opportunity. Let me sum up what the second time looked like. So in the Navy, when you go through the evaluation process, when you evaluate by your chain of command, annually, your performance evaluation, you get to write up from your point of view what your successes have been throughout the year. And the slang term they use for it is a brag sheet. That's what they call it, a brag sheet. Within the brag sheet, the final question asks you to assess. In fact, I'll read what the question was. Question on my brag sheet, question number 8 said, this was in the summer of 2005. It asked me if I had the authority to make changes within my work center, department or command, what would I do? What would I change? And so I was very honest and straightforward. I stated, that I worked in an environment that was arbitrary in terms of discipline, an environment that in terms of the environment was racist and xenophobic and sexist to the core, where shipmates it was very normal to have your private parts groped by other petty officers. It was very normal for the Klan and to be talked about. Nazi salutes, misogyny was rampant within the department and within the division rather. And what the leading senior chief petty officer told me was that the environment wasn't the problem; I was the problem. That I could not acclimate myself to the environment. In fact, he told me to my face, "You're the racist. No, you're the racist." And the person that was saying this to me was a person who was a proud Jewish American. The person that's the senior chief E8, the E7, the African American male, backed him up. The Alpo, other African American male, Reginald Buggs, who then became an E6 in the division, also backed this up. This was a gentleman who almost physically attacked me in the office one day for resisting his hoodlum-like assault on my character, which I write about in a piece that I encourage you to read, excuse me. The Struggle Against Racism Within the United States Military, a Lived Experience, which we published in On Watch, the journal of the Military Law Task Force, in their last piece. January 10th, so 6 months from that brag sheet, so I tell the chain of command in my brag sheet on my performance about the environment, and they rebuke me, okay? And then 6 months later, off the coast of Iraq, in the 4th month of a 6-month deployment, now I get a hangman's noose in front of my face. See, so it's the culmination of the racism. It's the culmination of the white supremacy and the arbitrariness of the chain of command, which then what emboldens the racists. See, the racist is emboldened because they see this. They see that he tries to resist, but the chain of command does nothing. In fact, the chain of command, by its inaction, emboldens us. Emboldens to the point where I'm asking some petty officers, I'm inquiring about a photojournalism program at Syracuse University for photojournalists. There's a partnership the Navy has with Syracuse where you can, for a year, get training at Syracuse University in photojournalism. And in the midst of inquiring about this program on January 10th, 2006, off the coast of Iraq. Now I understand the ship is off the coast of Iraq, flying sorties and dropping bombs on the innocent people of Iraq. We can see the planes launching and coming back, reloading and coming back. That's what an aircraft carrier does. The bombs come from the base of the ship up to the top, loaded to the F-16s. They fly off, come back, and then within the deck of the ship, I got a hangman's noose in front of my face. So we're bombing in Iraq and we're dehumanizing it within the ship. Okay. At that point, enough is enough. Okay. I know that my immediate chain of command is not an ally. I got to figure out some strategic way to engage my entire chain of command. This ain't the time to be keeping it at the lowest level possible. And I'm thinking about how can I effectively do this? So I gambled that if I wrote a direct email to these guys, now I'm doing this in writing. I'm not doing anything verbal, putting this in writing. If I gambled that if I wrote a direct email to these perpetrators, they wouldn't answer me. They didn't. I wrote a direct email to them stating that they should apologize for this. I even gave them some history on lynching in America, the sickness of it, the extrajudicial aspect of it, the fact that the country had never addressed these lynchings to this very day, no reparations at all, people being burned at the stake, castrated, perpetrators taking pictures, the late W.E.B. Du Bois in Atlanta, Georgia, seeing body parts in butcher shops of people who had been lynched, lynching photography without sanctuary. This was a great sporting event at a time in our country's history, okay? No response. On January 12th, I write a letter to my entire chain of command where I CC'd the EO. I CC'd the command master chief. I did this very clandestine. I wrote it to the admin department, CC'd the entire department from the CMC, the command master chief, on down. I did it at 0300 on January 12th. 4 hours later, an investigation had started. EO investigation was started. But when I hit send at 0300, when I woke up 4 hours later, there was an investigation. I had emails, investigation, come to the EO office. That would have never happened had I sat there and went directly to my chain of command about this. The direct chain of command, the senior chief who told me I'm the racist, Eric Sesson, okay? It would have never happened, okay? Couple pieces, and then I want us to get to some questions if we can. Number one, when the investigation opened, I was told I could have an advocate. So this comes back to Kathleen and legal counsel. I was never told I could have legal counsel. I was told I could have an advocate. My advocate I appointed was a colleague of mine who was very supportive of E4 named Chris Mason out of Richmond, Virginia. However, the perpetrator, his advocate, was an E6 African-American male petty officer, Reginald Buggs, who then goes on to retire as a master chief. So again, this internalized oppression. See, in order for African Americans to ascend the military ranks, you have to internalize oppression. Reginald Buggs understood that. I would defend the overt racist who pulls out the news against the African American male seaman Jonathan Hutto, even though I'm an African American. This is fact. Okay. However, the investigation was done by a dental officer who used a division-wide survey to assess my allegations. This gets back to Rod's point about some people feeling the same way you do. They just express it different. We got about 30 people in our shop, maybe 28, 30 people. We had about 6, 7 people, including myself, who came forward. So it wasn't a majority of the shop, but it was enough. Okay, so it's not about the quantity of the people who back you up. It's the quality of the people who back you up. And one of those people was a first-class petty officer by the name of Fernando Allen out of Panama. I'll never forget, because he told me on the mess decks, when he saw me during the investigation one day, he told me on the mess decks, he said, Hutto, I'm not backing them boys up. He told me that. I ain't backing them up, man. He said, all that grab ass. That's what he calls it, grab ass, and the groping of people, all that grab ass and they doing. I ain't backing them people up, okay? So that was huge. What also was huge was a female who came forward, one of the few females in our division, who came forward on a misogyny in the division. They used to put pictures of her in the back of the photo lab, all types of lewd pictures of her performing all sorts of sick acts. These are photographers by training doing this, okay? She came forward and supported me. Make a long story short, this went all the way to the CO. It was very, very telling to watch my chain of command speak up for the overt racist, even stating he had been doing good work, whatnot. There definitely was a difference. I write about this in the article. I won't go into it in detail here, but in the article, I talk about the difference between the executive officer's inquiry and the command office and the captain's mask. Because before you get the captain's mask, you have to go through the executive office. The executive officer threw the book at these guys. I mean, the executive officer's name was Bruce Lindsay. He ended up becoming an admiral in the Navy. Bruce Lindsay gave him hell in that executive officer's inquiry. He did. He felt that their actions, the terminology used that it isolates members of our team. That's what he said. He said, now, he used language like, in our fight against terrorism, this is isolating members of our team. The command master chief during the executive officer's inquiry actually pulled the noose out the bag and stated that we need, she stated that this is not honor, courage, and commitment. That's what she said. That's the slogan of the Navy, honor, courage, and commitment. And at one point told me that her and I could go outside and burn the noose. But I want to come back to one of Kathleen's points again in terms of when she stated that she's not a fan of IG because of they throw it back to equal opportunity, what have you. Let me state that the way that Noose got to the XO's desk really drives home why I question seriously, not question, I advocate against, let me not say question, I advocate against equal opportunity being within the chain of command. Because equal opportunity within my chain was a collateral duty stabbed by a Chief Petty Officer Cox, I remember. Because they're still within the chain of command. Before the executive officer's inquiry, I'll never forget this. The same senior chief Sesson who called me the racist 6 months prior during my evaluation process was then asking me before the executive officer's inquiry, he was asking me to bring him the Noose. Now, you got to understand the impunity that is explicit within the chain of command. It was my word against his. I mean, he could have discarded Noose and said I made the whole thing up. I was about to retrieve the Noose till I thought about it, and as I was thinking about it, I talked to the legal office, who told me they couldn't help me because basically they work at the discretion of the captain, the commanding officer. Then I go to the EO and ask him, where should I take the Noose? And he said, well, you have an order. You've been given an order to hand it over to the senior chief. So you know what I did? I disobeyed the order. I remember the training from boot camp, the Nuremberg laws. I remember that. The Nuremberg laws, yeah. Basically, I have the right to disobey unjust orders. So I took the Noose and put it on the executive officer's desk. Why? To make sure he got it. Okay. So then this comes to the retaliation that Kathy was talking about. There's definitely coming your way. Right after the executive officer's inquiry, where the executive officer threw the book at these guys, okay, you isolate members of our team. You all should have been, based upon the fact that you're Jewish American, you're African American, talking to the chief petty officers, you all should have instinctively been responsive to what he was to the environment, what was taking place. Okay. In the aftermath, and by the way, the perpetrator and the lead petty officer, and Matthew Bash, both pleaded guilty to the charges. Immediately following the XO inquiry, I was given not one but 2 counseling checks, which I refused to sign. I was given 2. One for failure to bring Senior Chief Sesson the Noose. I still have a copy of that. Failure to bring Senior Chief Sesson the Noose. Sir, no, sir. And then secondly, I was given a counseling check for improper use of the chain of command. Okay. 30 days afterwards, they give me a check saying that I had improperly used the chain of command by sending my letter that started the investigation. They said I should have came directly to them to give them an opportunity to address the situation, which I had just written to them about 6 months prior. I'm going to make a long story short, because I do want to end it in about 2 minutes max, is that, and James, I think it'd be good we did have a follow-up to this. But when we got to the commanding officer, Captain's Mass was much more milder than the executive officer, much more mild. Because the executive officer recommended 60 days of restriction to the boat, the pay being cut half months times 2. I mean, he went hard. The CO cut it from 60 days to 30 days. The half months pay times 2, he affirmed it, but then suspended it. So he never lost pay. The perpetrator ended up getting pushed out the Navy, but not because of this incident. There's a policy in the Navy called higher tenure. You have to make rank within a certain time. He ended up leaving the Navy, ended up joining the Army. Okay, and ascended the ranks in the Army. I told you the African American that defended him in this situation, his advocate ends up retiring as the Master Chief. The other 2 chiefs that defend the race end up retiring both as senior chiefs. The Matthew Bash, who's the lead. So I'm showing you the impunity, okay, that is interwoven within the chain of command. Do they really get punished? Okay, I thought it was a slap on the wrist. I ended up appealing it. And then I ended up getting 2 years. I ended up getting 2 years. And then 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 I all the way to Congressman John Lewis's office. And even though writing John Lewis did not bring about the requested appeal that I put forth, that's written about in the article I published on Watch, it did make the case public. See, I wanted it to be public. So I can be here talking to you about it 12 years later. See, I didn't want this thing to be swept under the rug where you can claim I got to go file freedom of information. I know by you responding to John Lewis, now it's in the public sphere. Okay. So finally, the recommendations that I will state forward, I'll just say the recommendations out front. I won't go into the meat of them. Number one is that once you decide to go equal opportunity, I said this before, you got to go all the way. You have to. You have to know that if you're not prepared to go all the way, you shouldn't file. Seriously, you have to know that your whole life is going to change in the military, and you're going to be targeted severely. Which gets to my second point, that it's imperative that you be a squared away soldier, sailor, Marine. Squared away means you can't be, for lack of a better frame, a shitbag and file a complaint. Okay. You got to be somebody that your colleagues know, that's a stellar person. That's a person that shows up on time, early on time. They always in squared away uniform. They always take care of business, because that's in the military culture, you have to embrace the suck fully in order to have the support of your comrades and colleagues going forward. You got to find a strategic way to engage your entire chain of command and not just that level, your direct chain of command. It's best to be embedded within your command for at least a year, if at most 2 years, for best results going forward. When I first went to Equal Opportunity, I'm pretty much by myself, okay, with the support of one petty officer named Chris Mason. A year later, now I got about 7, okay? So it's best to be embedded for at least a year. Outside support is imperative. We talked about that. Build clandestine until you're ready to come forward. In other words, have those one-on-one conversations with folks to get a sense of where they are, how they feel about the conditions in the shop before you be out front. A distinction has to be made between a hate crime and what discrimination is, okay? In my case, I called it racist intimidation. This is the only change I would have made. I called it racist intimidation in my initial letter. I should have called it a hate crime, okay? And to my knowledge, the military does not have a defined definition of what a hate crime is. This is where there's that contrast between the military and the civilian court. And then finally, what I would say is that if you're going to go to your congressional member, which I believe is a good angle to use, but do it after you have totally exhausted the command process. That's what I would say. I would say exhaust that internal command process. I would say before going to the congressional member. Now everybody won't say it. I'll say that because I believe it strengthens that piece going forward. I'm gonna end it there. I got a hard stop in about 10 minutes. So I'm here for another 10 if people are here for it. But thank you all. This was great. If we do a follow-up, I'm here for it.
Thank you. Well, we do have some time for conversation and questions for a few minutes, and I appreciate everyone hanging with us. I know it went a lot longer than we expected, but I didn't want to cut it off. It was too good. So we do have some time for questions, comments. I'll also mention, since this is being recorded, if Kathy, I'm wondering if people watching this down the road have questions for us, should we forward them to you, and then you can email Jonathan and myself? How do you think we should do that?
That would be fine.
Okay, great. So I will mention, if you're watching this recording, you have questions, we'd love to continue. You can participate just like you would if you were here live. So we'll put an email. Kathy, what's the MLTF's email? The help at military.
I'm not sure which one is the best to use.
Okay, we'll put it in the when I edit this up in the recording, we'll put it on the screen. So also, I'll mention that we will be sending out via email by October 1. We'll have a link to the recording to this presentation. We will also have all the materials provided then as well. And finally, when I do send out that email, we also will send out an evaluation. So if you have any comments, questions, especially about our CLE, about future topics, what worked, what didn't work today, we'd love to hear from you as well. So any last call, any questions? Okay, well, I think we'll call it for today. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. And again, keep an eye on your email, October 1. And other than that, thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Kathy. We really appreciate it.
Thanks to everyone.
Awesome. Awesome. Peace, y'all.